a delight of existence, the problem. But even if we accept this pure existence, this Brahman, this Sat as the absolute beginning, end and continent of things, and in Brahman an inherent self-consciousness, inseparable from its being and throwing itself out as a force of movement, of consciousness which is creative of forces, forms and words. We have yet no answer to the question, why should Brahman, perfect, absolute, infinite, needing nothing, desiring nothing, at all throughout force of consciousness to create in itself these worlds of forms? For we have put aside the solution that it is compelled by its own nature of force to create, obliged by its own potentiality of movement on formation to move into forms. It is true that it has this potentiality, but it is not limited, bound, or compelled by it. It is free. If, then, being free to move or remain eternally still, to throw itself into forms or retain the potentiality of form in itself, it indulges its power of movement and formation, it can be only for one reason, for delight. This primary, ultimate and eternal existence as seen by the Vedantins was not merely bare existence or a conscious existence whose consciousness is crude force or power. It is a conscious existence, the very term of those being whose being, the very term of whose consciousness is bliss. As in absolute existence, there can be no nothingness, no night of inconscience, no deficiency, that is to say, no failure of force, for if there were any of these things, it would not be absolute. So also there can be no suffering, no negation of delight. Absoluteness of conscious existence is illimitable bliss of conscious existence. The two are only different phrases for the same thing. All illimitableness, all infinity, all absoluteness is pure delight. Even our relative humanity has this experience that all dissatisfaction means a limit, an obstacle. Satisfaction comes by the realization of something withheld, by the surpassing of the limit, the overcoming of the obstacle. This is because our original being is the absolute in full possession of its infinite and illimitable self-consciousness and self-power, a self-position whose other name is self-delight, and in proportion as relative touches upon that self-position, it moves towards self-satisfaction, touches delight. The self-delight of Brahman is not limited, however, by the still and motionless position of its absolute self-beginning. Just as its force of consciousness is capable of throwing itself into forms infinitely and with an endless variation, so also its self-delight is capable of movement, of variation, of reveling in that infinite capable of movement. Infinite flux and mutability of itself, represented by numberless teeming universes. To lose further and enjoy this infinite movement and variation with self-delight is the object of its extensive or creative play of force. In other words, that which has thrown itself out into forms is a triune existence, consciousness, bliss, Satchidananda, whose consciousness is in its nature a creative or rather a self-expressive force, capable of infinite variation in phenomenon and form of its self-conscious being and endlessly enjoying the delight of that variation. It follows that all things that exist are what they are as terms of that existence, terms of that conscious force, terms of the delight of being, just as we find all things to be mutable forms of one immutable being, finite results of one infinite force. So we shall find that all things are variable expression of one invariable and all-embracing delight of self-existence. In everything that is, dwells the conscious force, and it exists and is what it is by virtue of that conscious force. So also in everything that is there is the delight of existence, and it exists and is what it is by virtue of the delight. The ancient Vedantic theory of cosmic energy origin is immediately confronted in the human mind by two powerful contradictions: the emotional and the sensational consciousness of pain, an ethical problem of evil. For if the world to be an expression of Satchidananda, not only of existence that is conscious force, for that can easily be admitted, but of existence that is also infinite self-delight, how are we to account for the universal presence of grief, of suffering, of pain? For this world appears to us rather as a world of suffering than as a world of the delight of existence. Certainly that view of the world is an exaggeration, an error of perspective. If we regard it dispassionately and with a sole view to accurate and unemotional appreciation, we shall find that the sum of the pleasure of existence far exceeds the sum of the pain of existence. Appearances and individual cases to the contrary notwithstanding, and that the active or passive surface or underlying pleasure of existence is the normal state of nature, pain a contrary occurrence, temporarily suspending or overlaying that normal state. But for that very reason, the lesser sum of pain affects us more intensely and often looms larger than the greater sum of pleasure, precisely because the latter is normal. We do not treasure it, hardly even observe it unless it intensifies into some acuter form of itself, into a wave of happiness, a crest of joy or ecstasy. It is these things that we call delight and seek on the normal satisfaction of existence, which is always there regardless of event and particular cause or object, affects us as something unneutral which is neither pleasure nor pain. It is there a great practical fact, for without it there would not be the universal and overpowering instinct of self-preservation. But it is not that we seek, and therefore we do not enter into our balance of emotional and sensational profit and loss. On that balance we enter only positive pleasures on one side and discomfort and pain on the other. Pain affects to our natural tendency and is experienced as an outrage on our existence, an offense, an external attack on what we are and seek to be. Nevertheless, the abnormality of pain, or its greater or lesser sum, does not affect the philosophical issue. Greater or less, its mere presence constitutes the whole problem. All being such, then how can pain and suffering at all exist? Thus, the real problem is often confused by a false issue, starting from the ideal of a personal extra-cosmic God and a partial issue, the ethical difficulty. Such is another, it may be reasoned, as God is a conscious being who is the author of existence. How then can God have created a world in which he inflicts suffering on his creatures, sanctions pain, permits evil? God being all good, who created pain and evil? If we say that pain is a trial and an ordeal, we do not solve the moral problem. We arrive at an immoral or non-moral God, an excellent world mechanist perhaps, a cunning psychologist, but not a God of good and of love whom we can worship, only a God of might to whose love we must submit or whose caprice we may hope to propitiate. For one who invents torture as a means of test or ordeal stands convicted either of deliberate cruelty or of moral insensibility, and if the moral being at all is inferior to the highest instinct of his own creatures. And if to escape this moral difficulty, we say that pain is an inevitable result and natural punishment of moral evil, an explanation which will not even square with the facts of life unless we admit the theory of karma and rebirth by which the soul suffers now for antenatal sins in the other bodies. We still do not escape the very root of the ethical problem. Who created or why or whence was created that moral evil, which entails the punishment of pain and suffering? And seeing that moral evil is in reality a form of mental disease or ignorance, who or what created this law or inevitable connection which punishes a mental disease or act of ignorance by a recoil so terrible, by tortures often so extreme and monstrous? The inexorable law of karma is irreconcilable with the supreme moral and personal deity, and therefore the clear logic of Buddha denied the existence of any free and all-governing personal God. All personality declared to be a creation of ignorance and subject to karma. In truth, the difficulty thus sharply presented arises only if we assume the existence of an extra-cosmic personal God, not himself the universe, one who has created good and evil, pain and suffering for his creatures, but himself stands above and unaffected by them, watching, ruling, doing his will, if allowing the world to be driven by an inexorable law upheld by him, or inefficiently helped, then not God, not omnipotent, not all good and all loving, or no theory of an extra moral cosmic moral God can evil and suffering be explained. The creation of evil and suffering except by an unsatisfactory subterfuge which avoids the question at issue instead of answering it, or a plain or implied Manichaeanism which practically annuls the Godhead in attempting to justify its ways or excuse its works. But such a God is not Vedantic Satchidananda. Satchidananda, the Vedanta, is one existence without the second. All that is He. If then evil and suffering exists, it is He that bears the evil and suffering in the creature in whom He has embodied Himself. The problem then changes entirely. The question is no longer how come God to create for his creatures the suffering and evil of which he is himself incapable and therefore immune, but how can the soul and infinite existence conscious blessed to admit into itself that which is not blessed, that which seems to be its positive negation? Half of the moral difficulty, the difficulty in its one and unanswerable form, disappears. It no longer arises, can no longer be put. Cruelty to others, are remaining immune, or even participating in the sufferings by subsequent repentance or belated putting is one thing, self-infliction of suffering, or being the sole existence is quite another. Still the ethical difficulty may be brought back in a modified form. All delight being necessarily all good and all love, how can evil and suffering exist in such another? Since is not mechanical existence, but free and conscious being, free to condemn and reject evil and suffering, we have to recognize that the issue so stated is also a false issue because it applies the terms of a partial statement as if they were applicable to the whole. For the ideas of good and of love which we thus bring into the concept of the all delight spring from the dualistic and divisional conception of things. They are based entirely on the relations between creation and creature, yet we persist in applying them to a problem which starts on the contrary from the assumption of one who is all. We have to see first how the problem appears, or how it can be solved in its original purity, on the basis of unity in difference. Only then can we safely deal with its parts and its developments, such as relation between creature and creature on the basis of division and development. We have to recognize that we thus view the whole, not limiting ourselves to the human difficulty and human standpoint, that we do not live in an ethical world. The attempt of human thought to force an ethical meaning into the whole of nature is one of those acts of willful and obstinate self-confusion, one of those pathetic attempts of the human being to read himself, his limited habitual human self, into all things and judge them from the standpoint he has personally evolved, which most effectively prevent him from arriving at real knowledge and complete sight. Material nature is not ethical. The law which governs it is a coordination of fixed habits which take no cognizance of good and evil, but only of force that creates, force that arranges and preserves, force that disturbs and destroys impartially, non-ethically, according to the secret will in it, according to the mute satisfaction of that will, in its own few self-formations and self-dissolutions. Animal or vital, nature is also non-ethical, although as it progresses it manifests the crude material out of which the higher animal evolves, the ethical impulse. We do not blame the tiger because it slays and devours its prey, any more than we blame the storm because it destroys or the fire because it tortures and kills. Neither does the conscious force in the storm, the fire, the tiger blame or condemn itself. Blame and condemnation. Blame and condemnation, or rather self-blame and self-condemnation, are the beginning of true ethics. When we blame others without applying the same law to ourselves, we are speaking with a true ethical judgment. We are not speaking with a true ethical judgment, but only applying the language ethics has evolved for us to an emotional impulse of recoil from or dislike of that which displeases or hurts us. The recoil or dislike is the primary origin of ethics, but is not itself ethical. The fear of the deer for the tiger, the rage of the strong creature against his assailant, is a vital recoil of the individual delight of existence from that which it threatens. In the progress of the mentality, it refines itself into repugnance, a dislike, a disapproval. Disapproval of that which threatens and hurts us, approval of that which flatters and satisfies, refines into the conception of good and evil to oneself, to the community, to others than ourselves, to other communities than ours, and finally to the general approval of good, the general disapproval of the evil. But throughout the fundamental nature of the thing remains the same. Man desires self-expression, self-development, in other words, the progressing play in himself of the conscious force of existence. That is his fundamental delight. Or whatever hurts that self-expression, self-development, satisfaction of his progressing self is for him evil. Whatever helps, confirms, rises, aggrandizes, enables, it is his good. Only his conception of self-development changes, becomes higher and wider, or begins to exceed his limited personality, to embrace others, to embrace all in its good. In other words, ethics is a stage in evolution. That which is common to all stages is the urge of Satchidananda towards self-expression. This urge is at first non-ethical, then infra-ethical in the animal, then in the intelligent animal, even anti-ethical, for it permits us to approve hurt done to others, of which we are disapproved when done to ourselves. In this respect, man even now is only half ethical, and just as all below us is infra-ethical, so there may be that above us whither we shall eventually arrive, which is supra-ethical, has no need of ethics. The ethical impulse and attitude so all important to humanity is a means by which it struggles out of the lower harmony and universality based upon inconscience and broken up by life into individual discords towards a higher harmony and universality, or based upon conscient oneness with all existence. Arriving at that goal, this means will no longer be necessary or even possible, since the qualities and oppositions on which it depends will naturally dissolve and disappear in the final reconciliation. Of them, the ethical standpoint applies only to a temporary, though all-important passage from one universality to another, or we cannot apply it to the total solution of the problem of the universe, but can only admit it as an one element in that solution. To do otherwise is to run into the peril of falsifying all the facts of the universe, all the meaning of the evolution behind and beyond us, in order to suit a temporary outlook and a half-evolved view of the utility of things. The world has three layers: infra-ethical, ethical, and supra-ethical. We have to find that which is common to all, for only so we can resolve the problem. That which is common to all is, we have seen, the satisfaction of conscious force of existence developing itself into forms, on seeking in that development its delight. From that satisfaction or delight of self-existence it evidently began, for it is that which is normal to it, to which it clings, which it makes its base, but it seeks new forms of itself, and in the passage to higher forms there intervenes the phenomenon of pain and suffering, which seems to contradict the fundamental nature of its being. This alone is the root problem. How shall we solve it? Shall we say that Satchidananda is not the beginning and end of things, but the beginning and end is nihil, an impartial void, itself nothing but containing all potentialities of existence or non-existence, consciousness or non-consciousness, delight or undelight? We may accept this answer if we choose, but although we seek thereby to explain everything, we have really explained nothing. We have only included everything. A nothing which is full of all potentialities is the most complete opposition of terms and things possible, and is the சத்தம் கம்மியா வரும். A nothing which is full of all potentialities is the most complete opposition of terms and things possible, and we have therefore only explained a minor contradiction by a major. By driving the self-contradiction of things to the maximum, nihil is the void. Where there can be no potentialities, an impartial indeterminate of all potentialities is chaos. And all that we have done is to put chaos into the void without explaining how it got there. Let us return then to our original conception of Satchidananda and see whether our formation a complete assertion is not possible. I must first make it clear to ourselves that just as when we speak of universal consciousness, we mean something different from, or more essential and wider than the waking mental consciousness of the human being, so also when we speak of universal delight of existence, we mean something different from, or more essential and wider than the ordinary emotional and sensational pleasure of the individual human creature. Pleasure, joy, and delight, as man uses the words, are limited and occasional moments which depend on certain habitual causes and emerge like their opposites, pain and grief, which are equally limited and occasional moments from a background other than themselves. The delight of being is universal, illimitable, and self-existent, not dependent on particular causes, the background of all backgrounds, from which pleasure, pain, and other more neutral experiences emerge. One delight of being seeks to realize itself as delight of becoming. It moves in the movement of force and itself takes different forms of movement, of which pleasure and pain are positive and negative currents, subconscious in matter, superconscious beyond mind. This delight seeks in mind and life to realize itself by emergence in the beginning. In the increasing self-consciousness of the moment, Its first phenomenon are devil and impure, move between the poles of pleasure and pain, but it aims at its self-revelation in the purity of a supreme delight, of being, of which is self-existence and independent of objects and causes. Just as Sachidananda moves towards the realization of the universal existence in the individual of the form exceeding consciousness in the form of body and mind, so it moves towards the realization of the universal self-existent and objectless delight in the flux of particular experiences and objects. Those objects we now seek as stimulating cause of transient pleasure and satisfaction, free, possessed of self, we shall not seek but shall possess them as reflectors rather than causes of delight which eternally exist. In the egoistic human mind, the mental pulse and emotion of the dim shell of matter, delight of existence is neutral, semi-latent, still in the shadow of subconscious, hardly more than a concealed soil of plenty covered by desire with a luxuriant growth of poisonous weeds and hardly less poisonous flowers, the pains and pleasures of our egoistic existence. Or when the divine conscious was working secretly in us devoured these growths of desire, when in the image of Rigveda the fire of God has burned up the shields of earth, that which is concealed at the roots of the spines and pleasures, their cares and secret boy, the sap of delight in them will emerge in new forms, not of desire but of self-existent satisfaction, which will replace mortal pleasure by immortal ecstasy. And this transformation is possible because these growths of sensation and emotion are in their essential being the pains no less than the pleasures. That delight of existence is the seek but fail to reveal, fail because of division, ignorance of self and egoism.